We tend to think of our brains as being our minds, as being the center of everything. We are a
Hmm.
very brain-driven people. And we tend to think of our bodies as just something there to drag around our heads. And in truth, if you think about it, our brain is actually stuck up there in a very dark skull, and it's not getting any information on its own. It's only getting the information that your body, your senses, your environment is sending to it. And so once you start thinking about it that way,
Welcome to The Ownership Game with Gary Montalbo. What would it take to get into the driver's seat of your life and leave your mark? The Ownership Game starts now.
In today's Western culture, when looking to solve problems or achieve goals, we tend to focus on working within the realm of the mind. There are thousands and thousands of self help books, coaches, and other practitioners that are all trying to teach us to create smart goals, build habits, write affirmations, change our mindsets, stay disciplined, on and on and on and on. These are all incredibly valuable practices, and I personally have gotten so much value from them. But do we have the whole story? Is there an intelligence within our bodies that we are not tapping into? And is this hurting our process or perhaps sabotaging it altogether when we don't? These are some of the themes that we explored in today's show with journalist, TV producer, and New York Times bestselling author Janice Kaplan. Her latest book, What Your Body Knows About Happiness: How to Use Your Body to Change Your Mind, is full of science-backed evidence on how your body is influencing so much more of your life than you even realize. The whole conversation was fascinating and at times mind-blowing, and I'm excited to share with you guys today. So, Janice, I'm excited to have you on the show. This idea of the body having an intelligence is something that I have been diving into myself, and I feel like it's a new concept. Like, people aren't really, it's not a common understanding that, that the body has an intelligence and that it speaks to us. I think we, especially in Western world, we're used to having this idea that the body is like this thing and it's all about the brain, and like, and we're not even very present in our bodies, I feel like. But how did you get interested in this topic, and how did you go down this road?
yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. And we'll get to all of those points. The way I started it is that I had written a book called The Gratitude Diaries a few years ago, which was a very, very popular book, I'm happy to say, and it still continues to be. And so I had learned all of the tricks about gratitude, all of the ways of reframing situations and looking for the positive. And I was on a vacation one day, and details don't matter, but it was one of those terrible days where everything goes wrong and you're landing in the airport and your luggage is lost. And so, I'm the gratitude lady. So I decided, okay, I know how to do this. I'll do all the right things and I'll say I'm grateful that I have a bathing suit in my carry-on, even though my luggage is lost. It's all good. And my husband is sort of laughing at me. And then we were going to an island, and we ended up a little bit later on a boat. And all of a sudden, the moment I got on the boat, the sun was shining, the wind was in my hair, the water is sparkling, and I didn't have to do any gratitude exercises. I just all of a sudden felt wonderful. And Gary, I'm sure you've been in those situations where you just something is just feels right and feels beautiful and all the stress goes out of your body. And I thought, what just happened? What what just happened there? And I realized the power of our bodies, of the situations we're in, the environments we're in, to change how we feel. And so I started thinking about that, and then started doing lots of different research to discover all of the different ways that that might be true.
And what did your research discover? I'm sure that's like the whole book.
Well, yes, but it's exactly what you started by saying, which is that We tend to think of our brains as being our minds, as being the center of everything. We are
Mm-hmm.
very brain-driven people. And we tend to think of our bodies as just something there to drag around our heads. Um, and in truth, if you think about it, our brain is actually stuck up there in a very dark skull, and it's not getting any information on its own. It's only getting the information that your body, your senses, your environment is sending to it. And so once you start thinking about it that way, you realize that, oh, your body is very integral to what's going on, and these body mind links don't work one way. We tend to think of everything happening from the top down, that things get sent from our brains to our bodies, but just as often it happens the other way, that the messages are going from our bodies to our brains. And that was the kind of research that was really exciting to discover.
Yeah, I've been oh, what's her name? I feel like, do I have the book right here? No. Lisa, the neuroscientist, Lisa, she wrote the book about the seven lessons of the brain or something. I feel like I should be a better host prepared. But one of the things that I was reading in her book is how the idea that your that it's actually your body makes the decisions first, and then your brain comes in and interprets it. That it's like this. We often think that it's like the brain that's doing the interpretation, but that relationship is actually um more united, more synchronous, I guess is the word. That you experience something first, and then your brain tries to interpret what it is that you're experiencing. So it's almost like there's even a little bit of a delay.
It's a
um
it's a very old theory that actually goes back to the great psychologist and philosopher William James in the 1800s. And we put it aside for a very long time, and it almost feels like it's been rediscovered. So think about it this way. If you're walking down a dark street at night and you turn somewhere and you suddenly feel like something's wrong, you get a little bit scared, and you decide not to go down that street. Your heart starts pounding, your hands get sweaty, and you figure, okay, I figured out that something is wrong there, and so I got
mhm.
scared. But it probably works the other way. Probably your body has responded far before your brain has. Your chest started pounding, your hands got sweaty, and your brain, which is just constantly scanning your body to see what's going on, that at that point your brain goes, "Oh, your chest is pounding and your hands are sweaty. We must be scared. And if we're
Mhm.
scared, we probably shouldn't go down that street." And it is very much the reverse of what we generally think. But it shouldn't be such a surprise. We don't control, and we wouldn't want to control all of our physical actions. You don't think about every time you blink. If you go into a street and a car is coming at you, you instantly pull back. Just like if you touch a stove, you instantly pull back. And if you had to stop and think, oh my goodness, that blue Toyota is coming right at me, and I think I better move back, you're going to be under that Toyota long before your brain gets the message. So, yes, it is very much sort of the new theory that our bodies respond, and the emotions are coming from what our body is feeling rather than vice versa.
Yeah, you're kind of pointing to something interesting, because I just started thinking about anxiety and how I feel like anxiety starts with like a physical sensation. Then now you kind of get caught in a brain loop about, because your body's responding to something, we don't know what, but then your brain now is like stuck in that experience, or trying to understand it, or trying to resist it, or and I'm wondering if like the lack of understanding of this relationship and this thesis that you're proposing, it's one of the reasons why anxiety kind of runs rampant in people, because they don't have that understanding that it's like your body speaking to you.
I think very much so. That's right. And I think the good news is that once you do understand it, you can play with it in interesting ways. So let's say you're about to give a speech, and once again, you have all of the, signs of anxiety, of stress, of nerves. So if you take a deep breath and you say, "Okay, I'm calm, I'm fine, everything is okay," your brain is going like, "No, no, it's really
No, it's
not.
not.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
I got
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
your body's not feeling that way.
Yeah.
You do. Well, there
You
are
can you
other
can repeat that mantra as much as you want, but we're still freaking out over here.
you got it. But what you can do is you can think about other emotions that have those same physical symptoms. So excitement is the same thing. So maybe you tell yourself, I'm not anxious about this. I'm just really excited. I'm just excited to do well on it. I'm excited to go out and talk to 1,000 people in this audience. I'm excited to explain to my boss why I should get a raise. And just that little tweak in the way you think about it actually works because your brain and body aren't fighting. And your brain is going like, okay, that makes sense. I get that. Obviously it's not perfect, but it does give you a way to reframe something in a way that can actually work.
Hmm. Did your work go into the idea of I've I've heard that trauma gets stored in the body as well. I don't know if you touched upon that in your work and if you have any insight into that.
I didn't do trauma because I was trying to do the opposite. I was trying to
Mm-hmm.
look at it from the idea of how can we use our bodies to make ourselves happier?
Mm-hmm.
Because that seems to me to be something that we don't think of. We generally know how our bodies make us miserable,
Mm-hmm.
a splinter
Mm-hmm.
if you don't think about anything else for the day. But I was curious about how our bodies could make us happier. And, I started off talking about the place you are. Well, there's incredible research that shows that actually water is one of the most calming places to be, and your sense of well-being increases very dramatically. There's a researcher named Matthew White out of the UK who did research, and he found that 2 hours a week near any kind of water, it doesn't have to be a glorious ocean where you live, you probably have that, but if you can have a reservoir, you can have a pond, you can have a lake, you can go to a waterfall, any place where you can walk and enjoy the beauties of water will calm you down. 2 hours a week doesn't have to be 2 hours at once. Half an hour, a couple of times a week does just as well. Being in nature, there's so much research about being in nature and how that affects us. And you can do simple things like flowers. There's research that shows that flowers makes us happier. So, go out and you don't have to wait for somebody to send them to you. Go out and buy a bunch of flowers at the local grocery store. It seems to be something that we're wired to feel. Oh, thank you, Gary.
For those listening, I just held up my bouquet of flower. I was like, I wanted
I wish we were closer that I could take.
to.
So just lots of little things that you can do like that that really will change how you feel. There's research that shows that if you sit on a soft chair, you have a different emotion than if you sit on a hard chair. The
Mm,
research was that people who sit on hard chairs negotiate harder than people who sit on soft chairs. It may be soft chair, soft heart. Well, when you're at home, you kind of want to be soft. So throw some pillows around and you'll probably feel a little bit better.
I love that. So it's kind of this idea of, using is it as simple as like using your body to hack your mood, your happiness, your it's like using the things that your body will respond to as a way to, yeah, just like, like adjust your mood, adjust your experience of life. I think all the things that you're talking about also for me, it's like they make me feel present.
Mhm. I love the idea of your body being a good hack. That's a hack for happiness. I love that. That's a really interesting way to think about it. And I think when we understand just how powerful our bodies are and how we feel, let me give you a piece of research that really stunned me when I discovered it and was one of the things that sort of then got me really writing the book. It was research that was done out of Yale, where the researcher had volunteers coming up to his lab. And what they understood was that he was going to read them descriptions of people, and it was going to be their jobs to decide whether they thought they were kind, good, whatever. What they didn't know is that when they were met downstairs and they got into the elevator, one of his assistants was with them, and she had a bunch of papers in her hand, and she fumbled with the papers, and she was holding either a warm cup of coffee or a cold cup of coffee, iced coffee. And she would ask the person, "Oh, could you just hold this for me for a minute?" And they would either hold the warm coffee or hold the cold coffee. And then they got upstairs and did what they thought was the point of the research. Well, the real point of the research was quite stunning, which was that the people who held the warm coffee found the people that they were described as much warmer and kinder than the people who held the cold coffee. Our brains think in metaphors. Something warm makes us feel warmed and warmed to the people that we're talking to. You know, it's an
Mm,
old English tradition. If something's wrong, give somebody a cup of tea. The famous UK cuppa. um, and it actually works. There's research that went on following on that that discovered that when you're feeling left out, when you're feeling abandoned, your body temperature actually goes down.
mm.
Again, the metaphor being left out in the cold is actually very true. Similar research, and actually done by the same person at Yale, he gave people resumes to evaluate. And that's sort of a standard trick that or research that psychologists do. And if you got that resume handed to you, Gary, you would be smart enough to know. I bet they're looking for discrimination, and am I going to like somebody with a female name less than a male name, or where they live, or what they look like? You'd think about all those things, but what you wouldn't think about is the weight of the clipboard that the resume was on. And it turned out that the resumes that were on heavy clipboards, the people were rated as more serious than the people whose resumes were on light clipboards. Again, somehow our bodies were sending the message that person's a heavyweight versus that person's a lightweight. So we think we're constantly making these rational decisions about everything, that our brains are in absolute control, and they're not.
Wow. So many questions now. Okay. So the one thing, I guess my question is, what do I do with that?
I
It's,
think
you know what I
I
mean? Because it's like, how do you use that information to better your life, you know?
Great question. And I think part of it is being aware of it. I was telling this research to somebody when I was writing the book, a very successful lawyer, and he said, "Oh, yeah, yeah, I think I'm a little too smart for that. I don't think that would
Uh-huh.
ever affect me." And then a couple of months later, actually, after I finished the book, his wife was telling me that they had bought a new car. And she said, one of the reasons was, and she mentioned her, and she said, my husband liked the way the door felt when it closed. It had a solid feel. It was just a really solid car. And I actually laughed out loud because part of my research when I was learning about the things that we just talked about was that car makers understand this, and car makers put
Mm,
weights in the doors to make it feel more solid because they know that people are judging on silly things like that. So I think if we can be aware of the things that are affecting us, we can use them for good, and we can use them to try to make ourselves feel better. Okay, here's one that you can use every day, Gary. Sitting up straight. When you sit up straight, the research shows you
already
feel
failed.
you're looking great. You're no problem. When you sit
No,
up
I'm standing right now because I don't sit up straight.
when you sit up straight, you feel more positive.
Mm-hmm.
And it's simply because think about when you're depressed, you kind of naturally slouch, right? And your body goes into a slouched position. And so your brain starts to associate being slouched with being depressed. And then it works both ways. If you're walking down the street and you're just kind of slouched over, as a lot of us do when we're walking, just because the weight of the world is on our shoulders, um, you start to feel a little more negative. You start to get a little more pissed off about things and be annoyed. And if you actually physically make yourself stop for a moment and stand up a little straighter, the world is going to look a little brighter. It's a very small hack, as you said, but it actually works.
Yeah. There's a couple things that I'm present to right now. It's number one is I feel like eh, we're very disconnected from our bodies these days. I feel like we spend a lot of time in our heads. We spend a lot of times interacting with electronics. I mean, I even have this experience myself whenever I'm like, trying to do a body scan meditation, or whenever I'm always like, oh, I can't have this experience of just not being very connected to my body. And I think that the way that we're living these days really doesn't nurture that. We're living very sedentary lifestyles. We're very living very in in-house, in apartments, in buildings, type of lifestyles. What I don't know what the word for that is. And so the first thing is like, what's the impact that we're having, that this is all having on our body that we're not aware of, and the impact that it's having on our quality of life that we're not aware of, right? That there's these ways that we're down. I mean, we talk about setting an ergonomic desk. We kind of talk about it that way, but even that is beyond what you're talking about. It doesn't go to the point that you're talking about, because when you're doing that, it's like, well, managing your posture, managing your spine, but you're really talking about the quality of life that you are having. The experience of life that you're having can be impacted by something as simple as the softness of the chair that you're sitting on, the texture of your linens, the flowers that you have, that that there's an experience of life that you can really be curating by making more mindful choices.
No, absolutely. And some of it is instinctual. There's some reason that you bought that beautiful bouquet of flowers that that you showed me a few minutes ago. Maybe it was to make yourself feel better. Maybe it was to make somebody else feel better. Maybe it was a way of, expressing a positive emotion. But you knew that the flowers said something positive.
Yeah.
And so I think that recognizing those things is really important. But how you started out in that question is also important. That yes, we have become increasingly disconnected from our bodies. And I think in the last several years that became even more dramatic as during the pandemic when we stopped having in-person meetings and everything was done by Zoom. Um, what a total disconnection from our bodies, right? We're these little faces in a square in a camera. And it happened all the time when people were at home for months and then they would meet somebody and they'd go, "Oh, you're much taller than I thought. Oh, that's not what I thought you looked like." Because we think that these images we're seeing are the person, but they're not. And you experience people differently in person. And the way somebody smells, the way their hands feel when you shake their hand, those are all very powerful things in the interactions we have and in how we feel about other people and ourselves. So losing that, I think, has been dangerous. And trying to reconnect to ourselves and to each other on a more physical level is actually really important. There is the sense of touch is a very, very powerful one. And when you lose that, you lose one of your major senses.
Yeah. One of the flower thing started as, so I have one of my dear friends that I work with. She's a spiritual coach, and she's been a guest on the show, Michelle Giovanni. And when I when I work with her, we host retreats quite often, and I call her a pack rat because she literally will bring anything and everything that she can think of, and she spends all this time really I mean, we're only there for 3 or 4 days, but she spends all this time making the space that she's in feel as cozy as possible for her. And
Mhm.
she has fresh flowers by her bed. She has, the linens and the things that she brings and the soap that she uses and half of the stuff that she brings she doesn't even use. But I'm realizing that this is part of what she's managing for herself, that it's like because the work that she's doing for the weekend requires so much effort emotionally, energetically from her, she's really creating a space for her that's very nurturing. And I learned the flower trick from her. And she always keeps fresh flowers at home, at everywhere we're working, she always has fresh flowers around, and so I started to do that as well, and so I keep fresh flowers in every room of the house, or at least every room that I spend a long time in, most of and it makes such a difference. Like, it literally just aesthetically, when you walk in, when you smell it, when it's one of the first things I look at in the morning when I walk into my office, and it makes a huge impact. And I think that those little nuances that we took the time to curate our experience in that way. And in me, what I'm realizing is that because I'm a man, I'm a leadership coach, so I bring a certain, like, do it and go for it and just get it done, and it doesn't matter what this experience is, and it's just like, ha. And it's like, no, I mean, you could do that. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But what you're really pointing to, and I think what I'm really seeing in this is like, how could you be more effective if you took a few moments to just curate your experience and really look at how these things are impacting your body, and then how that your body being impacted is going to make you more productive, um but also just have a more fulfilling experience of life, because I think that that is ultimately what Michelle is seeking out. It's just like literally having richness in every aspect of her life, even especially when she's working, I think. um
That's lovely, and she knows what makes her happy. She knows the
yeah.
things around her that make her feel good. Um, and in an opposite sense, she's curating in a lovely way. And a lot of times, there's so many books out about decluttering and clutter, and we think of clutter as just something that's a mess, or we want to clean up our house or whatever. But clutter is something, it turns out, that is very destabilizing to the brain because, once again, your brain is constantly scanning your environment to make sure that everything's okay. So, imagine you're walking and taking a hike and a snake suddenly appears. Your brain goes, whoop, not supposed to be there. And your body knows to take the action to pull away. Well, if you go into a house that's completely cluttered, there's your brain and body get out of sync because your instinct is the same, is to say, things are out of place here. This is wrong. But your brain says, yeah, I put them there. It's all okay. And so you're in this constant state of dysynchrony between your body and your brain, which is not a good place to be. So to declutter a little bit and have a calmer, it doesn't mean you have to get rid of all the things you love by any means, quite the opposite, but to have a calmer surroundings is going to help lower stress levels often.
Yeah.
Something
Even
else that
oh, I'm sorry. I
you
was
go
gonna
ahead.
say, to your point, even something like when my housekeeper comes over and cleans, she hasn't decluttered anything because I try not to keep a decluttered home, but just the aesthetic of the house being clean and shiny, it's like, even that is like a ah, like
I absolutely
I
agree.
feel the
Yeah.
relaxation,
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. It's your your body is saying everything is okay now. It's good. We don't have to worry. You can
Yeah.
step back. And interestingly, it happens with the things that we hear also. We don't often think about that, but there is a lot of noise in the world now. I don't know what restaurants are like near you, but I went out to a restaurant the other night. I was with good friends, and the food was excellent, and the service was terrific. And I came home and I was so unhappy. I was so tense because it had been so loud in the restaurant. And as soon as it got a little quieter, they raised the music so they could be sure that it would continue to be loud. And it's not, it doesn't have anything to do with age or hearing or anything like that. It is just that your body tenses when there's loud noise.
Yeah.
And there was a study actually in New York many years ago that a professor did, and she looked at a school in the Bronx where half of the school faced onto a subway track. And it turned out that the kids who faced the subway track were a year behind in reading the kids who were on the quiet side of the school. And this caused a huge uproar, as you can imagine. And she was a strong enough activist that she got, acoustic tiles put in the school and various things changed. And once that happened, the reading scores actually leveled off. But if you think about it, it's kind of shocking that noise interfere to that extent that it makes kids fall a year behind in their reading skills. And a lot of times people will say like, "Oh, I just get used to it. I don't even hear it anymore. What do you mean that noise bothered you? It didn't bother me." Well, you think it's not bothering you, but it's registering in your body. And, we can always close our eyes. We have eyelids. We don't have any way to close our ears when it's too noisy. And so those noises are constantly infiltrating our bodies and our minds.
Yeah. One of we just did an episode a few weeks ago with a new friend, Danielle Woodhouse Johnson. She founded a nonprofit, the Oasis Alliance, and what they are doing is she works with trauma survivors and curates their home, their spaces. So people that are transitioning out of like shelters, and she's a interior, so she has a background in working in clinical as a field as a not as a therapist but as case manager, and then now she's an interior designer. And so she combines both of those experiences, and she creates designed homes for people that are transitioning out of these horrible situations and stepping into their new lives. And it's the first time for many of them that they have this beautiful curated, beautifully like designed. And she talks about how when people donate stuff, it's like, they give the garbage, they give the stuff that's like the throwaway. But she makes sure that they have new things that, and I thought it was such a brilliant idea when I heard it, because it has to have an impact on the recovery. It has to have an impact in how they heal. And I think that's what you're talking about similarly, right? That these like, that the by them being in these spaces that are made for them, with them in mind, that they've been interviewed and thought about, and then someone took all that information and put something together for them. That whole process has to be healing in and of itself, and relaxing for the body as they're trying to process trauma.
Well, it's healing on so many levels, right? It's healing on the actual place where they are, that their environment is changing, and their environment is a healing place, and it's also the incredible power of gratitude, which is the book I wrote
Mm,
before, of knowing that somebody cares about you.
yes.
And, when I wrote the gratitude diaries, one of the things, and this is not new anymore, but was the power of writing a letter of gratitude, and writing a letter to somebody and telling them how much you care about them and something good that they have done for you, and just thanking them for it. And one of the psychiatrists that I spoke to at the time, who at the time was at Mass General Hospital, and he treated patients who dealt with very severe psychiatric problems. They were inpatient psychiatric patients with depression and suicidal tendencies. And he said that writing a letter of gratitude worked as well as almost any of the drugs that he used.
Mm,
And that's pretty incredible. But he pointed out that writing that letter works on so many levels because it's actually reminding you that there's somebody who cared about you and that there's somebody who did something good for you. And that's very much what your friend and colleague is doing. She's saying there's somebody here who cares about you.
yeah.
And that's a very powerful thing for people to feel. And when you write that letter to thank somebody else, you're also reminding yourself that, oh, somebody cared about me. I was
Hmm.
worth caring about. I was worth doing something nice for. And so you think you're thanking the other person when you write that letter, but you're actually doing something very powerful for yourself also.
Yeah, she mentioned that for many people that was like the first time they've had an experience like that, and how even that was confronting for them. Like they're like, "Wow, you really did this for me." So
Mhm,
you're definitely onto something there. Going back to the body,
mhm.
what did you discover about how we experience pain and because that's also communicated through our bodies? Um, is that did you get into that in your book?
I do. I have a chapter on pain, a couple of chapters on pain, a couple of chapters on placebos also, because the mind body loop on pain is fascinating, and we tend to think of pain as being very localized, right? If you have a backache, you want your back to be taken care of, and when there's an acute injury or an acute problem, that's the case. That's true. It's a localized injury. But many millions and millions of people in this country have chronic pain, and it's usually chronic back pain is the most common, chronic knee pain, and it turns out that the circuits for pain and for chronic pain are very different. And once it becomes a chronic pain circuit, it's almost it almost has nothing to do with the local place where it's occurring. Um, and so the top researchers in the field of pain are now working on it from the brain. So it's sort of the opposite of what we were talking about. They're trying to interrupt what you think you're feeling in the body by interrupting the circuit in the brain. Sort of think about it as like, those electrical circuits that you used to make as a kid where you had the battery and you had put the wires around and you wanted
Mm-hmm.
to light up the light. It was a great science project for every fourth grader. And if the circuit got interrupted anywhere, the light doesn't go on, right? You
Mm-hmm.
have to have the perfect circuit going all around. Well, it's the same with pain. You can interrupt the circuit anywhere. And actually, the place that they're starting to interrupt the circuit more and more is in the brain. Because much of, as I said, much of the chronic pain that we feel often is not localized. People hate to hear that. People don't believe it. They get insulted. They think you're saying, "Ah, it's all in your head, it's not
Mm-hmm.
real." And every researcher I spoke to said, yes, the pain is real. Of course the pain is real. We know the pain is real. We're not questioning that. We're just saying that the pain circuit is different than what you think it is. One doctor actually said to me, pain, what did he say? He said, pain isn't in your mind, it's in your brain. And I said, well, wait a minute, isn't your brain in your mind? Aren't they the same things? He said, yeah, but it's a very sort of nuanced difference because when you say something is all in your mind, people think that it's negative and that you're
Mm-hmm.
making stuff up. And we're not saying that. We're just saying that um, circuits go from a nerve in your body to your brain, and then the brain sends a signal back to interpret it, right? And so that is the signal gets confused in the brain. It doesn't get confused necessarily in the local spot. And realizing that is is fairly stunning and has been able to change people's perceptions of their own pain very, very dramatically.
Does it change how they treat it, or things? Did you discover different ways to address the pain when it's chronic versus acute?
Well, it helps, yes, very much so. An acute pain should be handled the way you would expect to handle pain. You know, you rest it, you put your leg up, you ice it, you do all of the things
Mm-hmm.
that you're supposed to. Chronic pain is actually the opposite. And one of the things that tends to happen is that if you're in chronic pain, you stop moving, and that
Mm-hmm.
causes it to get worse, and you
Mm.
tense about it, and that causes it to get worse, and you focus on it, and that causes it to get worse, and you feel helpless about it. So actually behavioral therapy, explaining to people about these circuits and that they are actually more in control of it than they think, works really well. So if you think that you constantly have back pain, stop and think about it. Well, do I have it every minute of the day? Well, no, probably nobody has it every minute of the day. So I didn't have it for the last 10 minutes. Okay, that's good. And what happened in those 10 minutes? And how can I make those 10 minutes last longer? And I think not being afraid of pain sometimes can make a big difference. The head of the pain clinic at Stanford, who is quite a brilliant researcher, told me a very funny story about a tennis player who came in and he had a pain in his foot and he was on crutches and he hadn't been able to play tennis and he just was, really upset about it. And forgive me, I forget the diagnosis of what it was, but it was some um, foot problem that the doctor explained to the tennis player that it's not life threatening, it's not even, it's going to go away. And the guy said to him, well, is it going to get worse if I walk on it? And he said, no. And he said, is it going to get worse if I continue playing tennis? Because everyone told me if I play tennis, I'll completely destroy my foot. And he said, no, it's fine. It's not going to, that's not the issue. It's just painful. And the guy said, great, left his crutches and walked out of the office. So um, the pain was still the same. He was still hurting, but now he wasn't afraid of it. Now he knew that he wasn't going to
Mm.
do any damage to himself. He wasn't
Mm-hmm.
going to end his tennis career by stepping on his foot. And so, okay, if it's just a pain that's going to go away, we can usually get over that. If we think that it's going to be something that we have no control over and that may destroy our lives, it's going to be a lot worse.
Yeah, we'll relate to it differently. How did you discover any relationship between creativity and the body and the role that it plays in the body in the creative process? I mean, the body plays in the creative process.
Yeah, that's my very favorite. That yes, absolutely. Creativity is very tied to physical movement. And there was a great study of creativity, again done out of Stanford as it happens, where people were asked to come up with as many uses as they could think of for a key, sort of a standard test of creativity. Now, it has to be, Gary, start thinking about them. It has to be original and it has to be practical. So you can't say I'm going to use the key to open my door because, that's too obvious. But if you say I'm going to use the key to dig in the ground and make a hole to plant seeds, you get points for that. So it's a question of people coming up with as many creative uses for a key as they can. And the research was done in two parts. People were sitting down to come up with as many creative uses as they could, and people were walking on a treadmill. And the people who were walking on
Mm,
the treadmill came up with twice as many creative uses as the people who were sitting down. And similar tests have found creativity rising by 80 to 100% when you're moving. So when we sit hunched in front of our computers and we don't move and we're trying to come up with something clever, it's the worst thing that you can do. So if you're
mm.
stuck on something, get up, walk around your room, go outside, just get your body moving. And the researcher who did that study called her paper "Give Your Ideas Some Legs," because that's what you want to do is give yourself the movement, the fluidity of motion that allows you to be more creative.
That makes so much sense. And I know that to be true for myself, although it wasn't articulated. I mean, one of the things, for example, last week, I felt myself just getting really heavy, really stuck, really, and I'm like, okay, I need to change the scenery. And I grabbed my laptop and my pad and my stuff, and I went to the beach. And I just worked from the beach. And immediately, the moment I stepped there, all these ideas started flowing. All this inspiration started coming just by changing the environment. And I always tell a lot of my clients that if you're gonna do your vision planning, your creative goal setting, get out of I'm a big fan of going somewhere, staying in a hotel room for 3 days, and just like mapping out the year ahead or something, because I find that the energy flows differently when I'm in a different environment, when I'm stimulated differently, when I'm in an environment that feels not sitting on my desk hunched over, as you said. And I do, I have a standing desk. Like when I do my interviews and my coaching calls, I like to stand up because it does give a place for the energy to flow. So that makes so much sense what you're saying, and I see it in my own experience.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to Aristotle. You know, Aristotle, the great philosopher, Greek philosopher, had what was called the peripatetic school. Peripatetic means walking. And the story is that he used to walk and talk to his students, and his students would hurry along behind him, you know, taking notes and listening to what he said. He liked the flow of ideas that way. So, and I think it's something that we naturally do. After I did this research, it occurred to me that way back when I've written many different kinds of books, and I used to write novels long ago. And at the time, I lived in the suburbs, and I would write and write, and then it would usually get to be mid-afternoon, and I'd be stuck, and I didn't know where I was going, and I would take a bike ride. And I have such vivid images of where I would be biking and flying down the street, and that's where all the ideas came from. You know, all of a sudden you're free, you have a sense of movement, and when your body has a sense of movement, your brain has a sense of movement also.
That
One
makes sense.
caveat to that, by the way, is that creative thinking is referred to as divergent thinking, and the other kind of thinking is a very specific kind where, you know, you have to answer a math problem, or you have to, you know, fill in a multiple choice test, and that is not improved by movement. So, you know, be glad that your bank teller, when he's counting out your money, is sitting down. That's okay. But if you want to feel more creative, if you want to come up with more ideas, then certainly go out and take a walk, take your laptop to the beach as you described.
Amazing. Well, Janice, thank you so much for joining us and being a guest on the show. I really think that this is um it's really important work. I think that we're not paying enough attention to it. And I love that you said this indirectly, but I love that the work that you're doing, the awareness that you're bringing through your book and being present in your body is really in the pursuit of happiness. That it's really about how do you bring more joy and happiness to your life, because I feel like we're very geared towards getting stuff done and being productive and being healthy and and it's like, how about just being happy, guys?
Absolutely. And the book is called What Your Body Knows About Happiness. And that is my approach. You know, well-being,
Yeah.
feeling better on every level. So thank you.
Yeah.
A pleasure to get to talk about this with you.
Same here, same here. So definitely go get the book. What Your Body Knows About Happiness, and The Gratitude Diaries, which was her other bestseller. Janice, thank you for joining us. It was a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I think the thesis that Janice is presenting in her book is really interesting. I've long been a believer that our bodies have an intelligence. I've long understood that many of the physical things we experience in our bodies are a result of trauma from our past that gets stored and amplified there. In the book Heal Your Body, Author Louise Hay popularized the idea that certain pains or discomforts in your bodies were quite literally communicating something specific to you. According to Hay, a sore throat means you are holding angry words or feelings that you are unable to express. A lower back pain is fear of money or lack of financial support. My point is, the idea that my body is having a conversation with me is not new to me. What is new to me is the idea that my body is actually influencing my decisions, and that my body can be used as a sort of tool to change my mood, to regulate my emotions, or to just create more happiness in my life. I mean, it seems obvious now. It explains why I love going to the beach, or why a clean home or office make me feel so good. But I think what I'm taking away from this conversation is to include my physical experience in every one of my equations. Much like my friend Michelle Giovanni, who spends so much time meticulously curating whatever space she's inhabiting, even if it's just for a few days. Something that I teased her about and even got annoyed with her about because of all the extra luggage that it creates that I now have to figure out how to load into the car. But now I see that all these little decisions support your physical experience greatly, which in return impact the work that we're doing, the choices that we're making, the experience that we're having, and ultimately the results that we're producing. I'm not sure about you, but I for one am going to start paying closer attention to these details, even if it means that at times I'm going to pack a little extra luggage in the car. As always, thank you for joining us this week. I want to take a moment to let you know that next week will be our last episode of the year and the conclusion of season 1 of The Ownership Game. I started the podcast back in January of this year, and I'm proud to say that we are ending the season with 45 episodes in the bag. And if I say so myself, that's not too shabby. Thank you for all your support and love, and I will see you next year.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Ownership Game with your host, Gary Montalvo. Make sure to like and comment on your favorite podcast platform, as well as subscribe so that you never miss an episode.